Christian Parenting.
Hi, Kari. Welcome back to the Christian Parenting Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you here. You've been here once before. We talked about our girls. We're going to talk all about girls again and just parenting in general, because I feel like so much of this applies to girls and boys. But first, let's just start with an introduction, kind of getting to know you, like what you do, about yourself, and about your family.
Okay. Yes. I am a mom of 4 girls and I live in Birmingham, Alabama. My girls are a little bit older now than since the last time we talked. My oldest daughter is 22. She just started grad school here in Birmingham. I have a daughter who is 20. She's in college at Alabama. And then a daughter who's 18. She just graduated from high school. She's going to Auburn next year. And then my youngest is 15 years old. She's going into 10th grade. So I feel like I'm in a new season of parenting, even myself. I will just have one child at home next year. And I just have a passion for moms and for girls and raising daughters. And just wrote my 6th book for moms raising girls. And so I've 6 books for teenage girls or for moms raising girls. So anyway, that's my passion. I'm married to my husband, Harry. And let's see, we just celebrated our 27th wedding anniversary.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Yeah. I love learning from you so much. I was telling you before we started recording, like I grew up in an all-girls family, 2 sisters, and I had these 2 boys. It's funny now, we have 10 grandkids on my side, and only 2 of them are girls. So my parents went from this huge girl family to, it's just all the boy things now. Like so many boy things.
Fun.
Yeah. It is fun. It is very, very fun. And my daughter loves being the only girl with her cousin. Like they just live that up. They're the queens of the family for sure. But I felt like I would have girls down because I grew up with girls. But like we said, every kid is different, and parenting today is just really different than it was when I was a kid. So there's so much to learn. So I appreciate you pouring into all the moms that are a little behind you, like me. So thank you.
Yes. No, I have a heart for you moms. I mean, I think in some ways technology has made things easier, but I think that y'all have it harder than even my generation did, just a few years ahead of you. So
yeah, there's just so much information coming at us, which is helpful.
Yes.
But you have to filter through it,
Yes. Yeah. And we didn't have that. My friends, we always talk about we're kind of the last generation to parent without the internet and to parent without social media. And I'm so glad because we didn't have a million voices speaking into our lives. And it is hard because you do have to have that discernment. And like you said, that filter to know who am I going to listen to, who am I going to filter out? And that takes time.
Yeah. And our kids are going to have that even more than we do. So it's so important to teach them to have that discernment, which is one thing you kind of talk about in your book. So maybe we'll get to that later.
Yes.
But one thing that you've said before that has just like really caught my attention and just stirred up my heart as a parent is that the longest relationship that we're going to have with our girls and our boys too is the relationship that we have with them after they leave the house. Yes. And so it's so important as parents that we're thinking about the here and now, obviously, because they need to learn how to function. But we have to parent with the big picture in mind and raise them to be people that we actually would like to spend time with when they're adults, to be functioning adults. And I love how you say we have to raise our girls in the light, but prepare them for the dark. And I think that goes with that too. So like, how are you experiencing that with your girls as they're getting older? Like one in grad school, she's like well on her own.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to coffee this morning with a younger mom, actually. She was like, I just have so many questions. And she's close with her parents, but she's like, but they parented in a different age. And so they don't really understand what she's going through. But we were talking about this, and I think the reason I wrote this most recent book is because what you realize as your girls grow up, I mean, I've been parenting for 22 years now and writing books for moms and girls for 10 years. So I get to travel and meet a lot of moms in the same boat that I am. But I was like, there's an irony to raising girls. And I'm sure I would say the same thing if I was raising boys too. But it's really funny. When your girls are little, I was taking my girls to etiquette classes and I was really focusing on the good and, be kind, be a light, all the good things that are fun and easy to talk about. But then especially as they get older and especially as they start getting ready to leave home and go to college, I'm like, I want to teach them to be a light, but I also better prepare them for the dark. And especially in the Christian world, I think sometimes we want to spare our kids those conversations. We don't want to have those hard conversations. But in the work that I do, I see that sometimes the girls who get taken advantage of the most are the sweet Christian girls because they've been so protected and they've been surrounded by trustworthy people and they've had a lot of love and all this virtue and all this goodness in their life. But, not everybody is like that. And so we live in a broken world and a fallen world. I was like, I laugh, as my kids get older, you're taking them to self-defense classes and, try to teach them to trust their gut and to tune into that spirit of discernment and to tell them, if somebody's making you uncomfortable or if you have an uneasy feeling, you can be rude. You don't have to be kind to somebody who's not giving you a good vibe. And it goes against their instincts. And I just think it's really important to prepare our girls just to not let them go out clueless and naive. And the way I think about it is we want to prepare them for the hard realities of life, but we don't want to harden them. And so I think the only way I can see to do it is just to do it through that lens of faith, that, just trust in God, that, just pursuing the light and trying to be like Jesus, but also not being naive. We've got to be in the world, but not of the world. And so it's hard and it's tricky. And I think that's why our girls and our sons, they need mentors. I think we're parents, but we're also mentors and guides for them. But even as moms, we need those mentors and those guides ahead of us. I still call my dad for advice all the time, and he's 88 years old. And so that goes back to that lifelong relationship, like you mentioned, that, I think if you have that connection with your child, like they're never going to not need you. They're always going to need advice and some mentoring from somebody that's older and wiser than them. So that's really how especially now that I parent my girls, it's into that long-term relationship, that friendship, and honestly, on the other side of 50, where I am now, I mean, I'm looking ahead. I'm thinking about, I want to be healthy for my children, to be able to support them when they're my age. It's hard to raise children. And I talk to 30-year-olds and they're like, I need my mom more now than I ever have, because they have small children and they want the grandparents to be engaged in their lives. So I just think it's a beautiful example of how God created us to live. You always have a purpose, whether you're raising little ones or your kids have left home and you're supporting the moms behind you, or you're supporting your own children as they're starting their families. Just being able to pass on that wisdom and, how to tune into God's spirit and God's voice in a world where it can be kind of tricky.
Yeah. Well, I think I've told this story on this podcast before, but I'll just never forget having, I think I had my third. So I had 3 in 3 years. Like my kids are very close in age, and I was so tired. And I remember calling my mom being like, when are they going to need me less? And she just started laughing and she's like, you call me every single day.
That's right. That's right.
And he's like, they're going to need you differently, but they're still going to need you. And you're right. Like I need my mom in so many ways still. And my friends who don't have moms anymore, they really feel that loss and have had to seek out other older, wiser women, because you need that connection with somebody who's gone before you to be like, what am I doing?
Right.
Am I insane? Like, am I doing it all wrong? Am I going to mess them all up, or am I doing okay? And it's just really hard.
Yeah. And I've always, and maybe it's the fourth child in me, but I've always done better in situations where people give me a heads up. I mean, I feel like the job, as we are older and as we have experiences, you feel like you kind of, okay, I've been into the wilderness, I've experienced some hard things, and now it's my job to come back and talk to these moms who are going into the wilderness, just give them a heads up. And even with this mom that I met this morning, that's what I kind of did. I was like, she had a lot of questions. Her daughter is going into 5th grade and just had a lot of questions, and having those hard conversations. And she was like, I don't want to plant seeds, put ideas in her head. And I was like, I was kind of telling her, I was like, you want to have the first conversations about these hard things with her. And I know it's so hard and it's awkward, but you don't want the world or the internet or a friend being the first one to have those conversations. And you really want to impress the truth in her mind, so that when other voices come along, she knows which voice to trust.
Yeah.
And so it's hard. And you don't know that. You don't know that with your first one, because you haven't experienced things. You need people kind of giving you a lay of the land. I'm like, this is what typically happens in 7th grade. And I know my community. I was like, this is what happens as they go to high school. This is what happens in 10th grade. And you start seeing, the friend groups, there starts to be a lot of shifts and fissures, because some kids are drinking and some kids aren't. And there's just a lot of things that now, looking back, I can see it's totally, I don't want to say predictable, but in many cases it is predictable.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, pretty predictable. And you need those parents ahead of you that have navigated it. And it just helps you, I think, sometimes make better choices. Not to say you're not going to not struggle, because every generation has new struggles, but you're going to do it a little bit better than if you had no guidance at all.
Yeah. So when I was reading through your book, you have an entire chapter on connection. And I feel like so much what we're talking about comes back to having a strong connection with your daughter, because you have to have a strong connection when they're little to be able to guide them and tell them what to do without them being like, you're annoying and the worst, which they still do. But it's also important when you're not actively parent, but when they're adults too. So how do you build a connection with our girls without being overbearing or too involved or too emotional and panicking every time they panic and navigating all the friend drama. There's so much to navigate as a kid. So how do we build a
Yes.
connection to do that well with them?
Yeah, I think it's a learning process, and I think it requires knowing your child. But,
Mm,
with my kids, I think just really knowing your child and starting with what they love to do. And, having 4 children, I really had to be intentional with my connection time because, I remember when they were little, I'm like, I'm going to take somebody to breakfast every Monday before school. But, that lasted about 3 weeks. It's just hard for me to make that
yeah.
daily time. And so sometimes you have to get creative. And so, I would use I felt like there was a season when I had like 4 in the tween and teen years where we were going to the doctor all the time. I mean, it might have been the dermatologist or the orthodontist, but we probably had 3 doctor's appointments a week. But what I would try to do is I was like, I'll leave a little bit of a gap in my schedule so that we can go to the doctor's appointment. But then if this child wants to go get Starbucks afterward or grab lunch, we can do that and have some one-on-one connection time. So a lot of times, especially most moms are busy, you might have to kind of be creative with that. When we started looking at colleges with my children, which, we'd always do an Old Miss trip, which is such a cute town. And so that was always a fun mother-daughter trip. So that was a way that I would get some mom time in, but we would also have some of their friend time in, and you're knocking out a college trip. And, and then I would use those car drives home with my daughter to, okay, I'm going to tell you some realities about college. This has got my brain going, being on the college campus again. I don't want you going in naive. And I talk about that in the book. So I think you can have those little connection times like that. But like I said, it just might be knowing your child's love language. I have another child that she loves cookies, like chocolate chip cookies are her love language. And when she was little, she was the one that was always kind of fighting me on things. And we got into an argument one day and I just snapped at her. I yelled at her and went shopping that day. And then as I was out, I felt bad and I started feeling guilty. I was like, okay, I was too harsh. And somebody told me that a new cookie shop had just opened up down the street. God just put it on my heart, get her a cookie. Anyway, I went and bought her a chocolate chip cookie and I brought it home, had it on the countertop. And when she came home, she came into my office and she asked me, she's like, Mom, who's that cookie for? And I told her, I was like, I bought it for you. I was like, I was too harsh earlier and I'm sorry. So that was kind of my peace offering. And she just got the biggest smile on her face and just kind of melted. And we ended up having a good conversation. She apologized for her part too. And so, you hear a lot now about there's no perfect relationship. You do life long term with anybody. There's going to be tensions, disagreements. We're going to act in some very unbecoming ways. But one of the most important things we can learn to do is to repair that relationship. And that was something that, a lot of us, I wasn't taught that growing up. We didn't repair.
Right.
My sister and I got in a fight. We just didn't talk for a few days. But that's something I've really learned with my children is to go back and repair, especially to own up to something that I've done. And, to know that I'm not the perfect role model. Jesus is, that's the one you're looking at. Just always going back to repair and just to keep that connection. And I think sometimes it's hard for us as moms to admit when we were wrong or to admit that maybe something was our fault or partially our fault because of all the things we don't want to fail at in life. We don't want to fail at motherhood. And this is where
Right.
we just have to remember God's love for us and the fact that, we all need grace. We need grace for ourselves and we're going to get it wrong. And that's okay. We cannot stay stuck in that guilt and that regret. That's why we need Jesus. But, apologizing, owning up to what we do, and then learning from that and getting better from that. And I think it's really healthy for our children to see that too. And that builds our connection with them because they see that we're human. They see how much we need Jesus and it helps them feel okay about them making mistakes and them messing up too. So, as I told this mom earlier, that what you realize as your daughters and your sons grow up is, yes, you're their parent, but you're also their sister in Christ. And I think sometimes we have to take off our parenting hat and just, have those heart-to-heart conversations with our children that, we're in a broken world. We are all sinful. We mess up, but that doesn't mean it's the end of our story. There's always hope when you keep Jesus in the picture.
Yeah. Well, and we're the first role model of what a godly woman looks like to our girls.
Yeah.
Like we're the first one. There will hopefully be so many more, but we're the first. So if we can do that well and show them what the gospel looks like, which means mistakes and grace and forgiveness and reconciliation, like that's so powerful because unfortunately
Yes.
you have to continue to say what you've done wrong your entire life.
Yes.
Not just with your family, but like at work and with friends
Yes.
and even just, sorry, I filled out the wrong form at school or whatever. We make so many mistakes
Right.
throughout our
Yes.
lives. And we have to teach our kids young that that's okay because there's so much pressure to be perfect.
Yes. And I feel like that's something I see holding mothers back. And that's something I really wanted to address in this book. I feel like a lot of moms stay stuck in their mistakes
Mm.
And I'm not saying we do need to, be aware and acknowledge them and learn from them. But I see so many moms stay stuck in their mistakes, and it affects their parenting because they're so in their head about what they wish they'd done differently in the past, or their child is, a lot of moms do this, their child is having a problem or having a struggle and they're stuck and blaming themselves. I should have done this. I missed the boat here. And they're stuck in that place. And I've been there too. It's really easy to just stay stuck in that regret or that worry or that fear. But what I've learned from the work that I'm doing is that these girls and these boys, they need us. An imperfect parent is better than no parent at all. We might be all that they have, but even with our flaws and our imperfections, they need us. And we can't afford to stay stuck there because we've got to be helping our children navigate a hard reality. It's a harder reality than what we're navigating at their age.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really what keeps me driven to keep moving forward is I know I'm messing up. I'm not perfect, but I'm not going to give up because my children need me, your children need you. And I think it's so important for us as moms to encourage each other in that journey too. Like I said, giving ourselves grace and learning from our mistakes and being vulnerable, just God is a way of humbling us. Just when we think we've got something figured out, a certain season of parenting figured out and getting a little big headed, you're going to have a new season, your child's going to have a new struggle. And all of a sudden you're going to feel pretty helpless again and, out of your league, but that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like so much of that stems from control too. Like if I could just have
Yes.
done this part of my job better, then they wouldn't have
Yes.
had this struggle. And you're like, that's not the way it works, nor is it the way we want it to work. But we
Right.
do. We like to control. It would just feel
Yes.
better.
Yes. Yeah, you're
Absolutely.
right. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked a little bit like the grace and reconciliation and walking in that way and connecting with our kids. But what
Mm-hmm.
about when, like, my daughter's 9? She has
Mm-hmm.
big emotions. I also have big emotions. We're a whole family filled with large emotions. And
Yes.
sometimes we do a really good job, both my husband and I, of like being calm and, doing all the things that we know to do with kids when they're having an emotional meltdown. And then sometimes
Yes.
she will be sassy at me and I will just be so sassy right back. I'm like, I
Right.
can top this. I can be sassier than
Yes.
you. You learned it from me.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
how do we not do that? And then what do we
Mm-hmm.
do when we start to do that? Like you've had
Yes.
4 girls, so I'm assuming you have experienced that before.
Yes. Yeah. And I always laugh. I'm like, my poor oldest. Our oldest child's our guinea pig. That's the
They
one
really
we
are.
don't know.
I feel so sad for them
I know. I
sometimes.
know. I've heard before that the oldest child gets the best of the grandparenting and the worst of the parenting. And I'm like, there's a lot of truth in that.
Hey, and the best of the grandparenting is pretty dang good. So
Exactly.
yeah,
So there are definitely
making
some
up for it.
benefits. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, my problem, my mistake that I can look back is as my girls became teenagers and they did have those big emotions or those sassy moments. I was the same way. I would just dish it right back. And then they would amplify it, and then I would amplify it, and it just kind of kept going from there. And then a counselor told me, he's like, the reason that, especially I think in that 12 to 14-year-old age range, I feel like that's when the emotions are really kicking in. And
Middle
he told
school.
me, yeah, middle school it is. And, there's a lot of drama going on, but it's typically because that's the age where our kids are having really big emotions and big thoughts and feelings for the first time. But the part of the brain that feels those feelings and has all those thoughts, part of the brain that's behind that is the interpretation. And so these kids are having these big thoughts, these big feelings, but they can't interpret them yet because their brain isn't there. And so, and I thought, wow, that's a hard position. Have you ever been just so angry and it makes it worse because you can't figure out why? Or you're crying and it's worse because you can't figure out why. And so I started to see that's really our role as parents is to help them understand, rather than reacting to whatever they're reacting to, is to really be that bigger, kinder, stronger, kinder one. And I have a friend who says that's something they use in counseling circles. I think it's called the circle of security. And our job is to be the bigger, stronger, kinder, wiser one as a parent, and basically not to overreact. So the image that my friend gave me is something that has really helped me when I want to go overreact or jump on that roller coaster. She's like, imagine that you and your child is getting on the emotional roller coaster. And as moms, our tendency is to go get on that roller coaster with her. When she's up, you're up. When she's down, you're down. You're just letting her emotions dictate yours. But what the stronger, kinder, wiser one wants to do is you're basically in your mind telling them, I'm not going to get on that emotional roller coaster with you, but I will be standing here on the platform waiting for you with my arms wide open when you're ready to get off. And we don't always do that. Sometimes we fail, but I think, that's our goal, is to stay on the platform. I want to make some coffee mugs that say, stay on the platform, mom.
I think you should.
I really think I should. And yeah, I have a friend that she said that she's a counselor. So she always talks about this with her friends. And she's like, yeah, I have a friend that when one of our daughters is testing us, that the mom will say to her, stay on the platform, mom, stay on the platform. And we need to laugh at ourselves because sometimes we don't stay on the platform. We act like a teenage girl ourselves. But
Yeah.
I think that's the goal. And I've heard it said that, no child wants to be the strongest person in the room. And so as parents, and that's not to say that we shouldn't have big feelings or that we should never, that we have to always be strong and that we have to be perfect. But what I have learned is that when we are struggling, when we're not feeling strong and we're having fears and worries, don't take that to our children. That's when we need to have our counselor or our spouse or go pray to God. Like we need to have our safe places, people that we can break down in front of.
Yeah.
That we can, get the help that we need, the support that we need, so that we can turn around and be strong for our child. And I just think that's so important. And nobody really teaches us that as moms. But that's not to say, again, that we have to be perfect, that they never see us have our weak moments. But I do think that, it's kind of like when I see my husband, he's very calm. Nothing really rattles him. But when he does, in those rare moments when he's gotten frazzled or I've seen fear, I'm like, oh gosh, it must be bad for Harry to be freaking out like this,
Right.
And I need him to stay strong for me. And I think our kids are wanting that from us too. And so it can go against our nature because we're very intuitive as moms. We're very empathetic. And so sometimes whatever our kids are feeling, we're feeling too. But it helps me to have that goal, stay on the platform.
Well, I wonder if that also, as you're talking, I'm like, that kind of also goes back to control too, right? Because if we can get on the roller coaster with them, we can navigate that roller, like we can do it better.
Right.
We can be on the roller coaster with them. And it feels like that should be better because we want to be with them all the time, but really letting them off and waiting for them when they get back. And that is really a great visual too. Because when they get back from a roller coaster, they're like ready to be like, did you see what I did? That was amazing.
Right. And that's what we do. Sometimes we're carrying these emotions from them and they're so upset. I've had this happen. And, my daughter was so upset about something one night and the next morning I'm still like dwelling on that. And then she's perfectly happy. She's fine and moved on. And yet I'm still feeling the emotion she was feeling the night before.
Yeah. You're like, don't you know that I felt that too?
That's why I stayed up all night worried about you.
Yeah. I did tell our nanny recently, I told her she was having some friend issues and she was kind of frustrated with her mom because her mom, I don't really know what happened, but I was like, I just promise you that your mom hurts with you as much as you do, if not more. And she might not be doing it perfectly, but it's just because she hurts for you and she wants it to be easy. So give her a little grace.
Yes.
Go home and talk to her, but like she just cares about you so much.
Yes.
And it's hard. But as a kid to be like, my mom's supposed to be that sturdy person, do exactly what I want. Like we're supposed to read their minds.
Right. It is. I mean, I think most moms would say, I would much rather something hurtful or harmful or whatever happen to me than to my
100%.
child. It's, it's easier to handle it happening to you than when it happens to your child and you feel helpless.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So besides connection, what are some of the other like priorities you've had in your home to help your girls as they've grown to prepare them to be a light in this world?
Mm-hmm. The first chapter is just to parent the heart and not the behavior. I even think now, like, okay, when my kids have children, God willing, what are the first things I want to teach my grandchildren? And I really think I hope the first line that they learn from me is Jesus loves me. And especially with daughters, I just think that girls are so hard on themselves and girls want to please. And so, I share a story, and whenever I've shared this in a talk, there are always moms that just relate. But I had one daughter that was such a strong-willed toddler. I mean, if I said go right, the sisters would go right and she'd go left. It was like whatever. And I was, my mind, I'm like, I don't have time for this. She's an outlier. She needs some tough love. She's not listening to me. I need to like keep her in her place. And so I was harder on her because she gave me a harder time. And so I thought that's how I needed to parent her. And so my husband took a different approach. He's a lot more calm than I am. And granted, he wasn't there all day long like I was, but he'd come home and when she acted out, he could stay calm. And, if she did something that we didn't want her to do, he would like pull her aside and he'd put her on his lap and he talked to her for a few minutes and I'd see her just kind of listening and nodding her head. And a lot of times she did act better after that. But I would get frustrated with him. I'm like, you need to be tougher on her. You're being too soft. But what I noticed over time was that she would go hug him for like no reason at all. Just go up and hug her daddy. And she never came up and did that to me. And that's what made me start thinking. I started just observing. I'm like, what is it that he's doing? And I think what it was that she Even though I loved her, I don't know if she felt my love like she did from
Mm.
him.
Mhm.
And I think that about God, when we truly understand how God loves us and that nothing can make him stop loving us, then, you just crave his love. You want to go to your father. And so that was a lesson in parenting for me. Like, not to say that she still didn't need some consequences or whatever, but
Right.
it taught me, and people would tell me, sometimes people would try to politely tell me, like a babysitter or somebody that was older, that she needed a little extra attention. But, my mind, she was just being bad. And so that's one child I wish I could go back and like redo her toddler years, and I
Mhm.
tell her, I was like, I wish I could just like sit her on my lap and just take 2 minutes to be like, I love your strong personality. Like, God gave you that strong personality and he is going to use it to move mountains. But, right now I need you to listen to me. And if you don't listen, you're going to face some consequences. Like, do you understand that? And then I wish I'd wrapped it up with a hug and made sure that she knew how much I loved her, that this didn't change my love for her, and that I was really not condemning her as a person, but condemning, the behaviors, what I was
Yeah.
correcting. And so I don't know. I think that is like the most important starting point, is that connect before you correct. And that was
Mm.
something that nobody ever taught me as a young mom, that I would do differently, from the get go if I could.
Yeah. Well, I feel like somewhere there's like a toddler mom listening who just
Yes.
now has that idea, which is it's so simple, but it is hard to do, especially when you are
Hmm.
home with them all day long and you're like, I'm so tired. I'm so
Yes,
tired.
exactly.
And you are
Exactly.
so much. You are so much a lot, but that's really
Yes.
good. And I feel like sometimes it's easy to like read a book or listen to a podcast like this and walk away and be like, yes, like I'm going to go do these things. But actually implementing is really hard because we're so worried about parenting right. And
Yes.
we're all stubborn and sinful. And so it's just really, really hard. So how can moms just like shift their mindset from like fearfully holding on or feeling
Mhm.
like they're messed to just preparing their daughters to just run their own race and live their lives well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I wrote More Than a Mom. That was my last book that I wrote for moms
Mm.
before this new one. And I realized I think we need to take care of ourselves as moms too. And
Mm.
really goes back to grace. And I think that what happens sometimes is when our kids are little, we are so stuck in survival mode that we just stay in that survival mode even as they get older. And, what happens is that sometimes, especially when you've been parenting 10, 15 years, especially get to 20 years, that burnout starts to hit you, and you just start feel kind of numb and robotic. And so I think that, we are so quick to jump on anything to help our children, but I feel like
Mm.
we are not as quick to invest in something that's going to help us. And that's something you really realize, is that, our children can only be as, we can only take our children as far as we've come. And what I think about too is like, I need to, prioritize our, okay. And it can be really hard to do this, especially if you're a type A personality like a lot of us. But I think sometimes, especially in those busy years of raising kids, we have to make peace with accomplishing less than a day. And that was something that I realized, especially in those seasons where my kids needed me more, or there was an issue that I needed to have more brain space for, that sometimes I would have to eliminate things from my calendar and I'd have to change my plans. And so, with me now, I just have one child at home. It's a lot easier for me to write books and I can travel more, I can do more. But there was a long time that I was piecing things together. I was just kind of keeping my feet in the water, but I wasn't diving in, full fledged, because I needed more space and capacity to be
Mm.
able to be available for my daughters. And I have a lot of friends. A lot of people think that, as your kids get older, they need you less. And everybody thinks that, that's when you're going to have more time to work and do things. But as I was telling this young mom earlier, I have a lot of friends that they actually worked from when their child was born until they're about 7th or 8th grade. And then that's when they retired, because they're like, they're older, they need me more, not all the time, but in bigger ways. And I want to have more
Mhm.
brain space for them. And so it's a different story for every mom and every family. But I just think, don't be scared to do what's right for your family. And I have a therapist friend, she talks about whether it's something that you need more time to take care of yourself, or more time to take care of a child, or just have more space for your family. Sometimes we need that grace in that space. We need that grace for ourselves and maybe any mistakes we've made. And then that space in our calendar, in our head, wherever it is, so that we can really focus on what matters most.
Yeah, which will look different for every family, like you said. And that goes back again
Mm-hmm.
to the discernment that we have to have, that we're just really listening to the Lord and what He wants for our parenting and for our daughters and our sons and our husbands and our whole families as a whole. Yeah,
Yes.
those are good words. Well, I am so grateful that you came back on to talk to us. I just think you're so wise, and I'm just so grateful that you are pouring into moms like me, because we all need it. So thank you so much. Can you tell us where we can get your book and connect with you, listen to your podcast, all the things?
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I'm a huge fan of y'all's podcast and just appreciate the good work you're doing. And I think that moms can't hear these messages enough. So thank you for that. And yes, my books are all available on, Amazon, Barnes and Noble are the places that books are sold. You can find me on Instagram. I'm pretty active there. I also have a Substack and Facebook. Those are the main places. And then I have a podcast that I'm more active in sometimes versus others, but it's called the Girl Mom Podcast. And so I'm in a season of recording right now. So there'll be a little bit more material than there maybe has been in the last 6 months.
Oh, yay. I can't wait. Yeah. Well, I'll get all that linked in show notes so people can find you and listen to those new episodes and get your book and connect with you. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Christian parenting.